I'm Miss McKellar.
And I'm Miss Krout.
And you're watching the Pastcast. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Pastcast.
Welcome, guys. We're so excited.
So, how did your 8th graders feel about the Pastcast?
I got positive reviews. What about you?
I had so many 8th graders stop by and say how much they loved it.
We love it. We want to shout out Mr. Benson's class. Thank y'all for watching.
Y'all are the best.
You are the best. And we had a couple 6th grade classes tune in.
I heard. That's awesome.
Amazing. We just want to give y'all a little update. We are obviously on YouTube. You can find us on your 8th grade social studies Schoology pages, and we are now on Spotify.
So fancy.
So fancy. This is so exciting. So welcome back. We're excited to have you, and we are so excited to get into episode 2.
All right, let's get started.
Let's do it.
So we left off last episode, or episode 1, we talked about the problems of the Articles of Confederation. This episode, we're talking about how the Constitution fixed those problems.
Yes, and let's just remind you really quickly, our essential question for this unit is, how did weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation lead to the creation of a stronger government under the U.S. Constitution? So we are going to give a rundown of each problem and the solution to go with that. We're not going to go too much into the problems. If you want to check out the problems of the Articles of Confederation, go back to episode 1 and watch that to get the recap, and then come back here and you can find the solutions that the Constitution gave.
All right, let's get started.
First issue is that the federal government could not tax the states. They could only ask the states to donate money. Why was that a problem? Just really quick.
Because our federal government could not raise enough funds to fund a military or pay any of the judges.
Exactly. So if we can't have a military, then we can't enforce the laws. We saw this in Shays' Rebellion, which we talked about last time. So the way we're going to fix this is, it's a pretty simple fix. We're going to give the federal government the power to tax the states. Specifically, Congress is going to hold that power. Now they can require the states to pay a tax, so we can do all the things that we need to do as a federal government.
Perfect. Easy fix.
That's super easy.
The second problem of the Articles of Confederation is that, kind of like we said, no military.
Exactly.
So
no military.
So how did the Constitution fix this problem?
Kind of the same thing. Before, it was up to the states to have their own military. We had a federal military, but again, it was all based off of donations and no one was donating any money. So now we're going to allow Congress to raise a military, specifically armies and navies, and they're going to provide for the common defense. The other job of a military, though, is to enforce the laws, which made the people feel a little iffy.
Hesitant, for sure.
Yes.
So remember, the British military was used against the colonists. And so a lot of colonists felt really hesitant about giving the federal government control over the military.
Yeah, but the alternative is to not have a federal government strong enough to enforce laws, which also leads to chaos. So had to make a compromise. Federal government can now raise armies and navies.
Pretty simple.
Very simple. Our next one is also a little bit about enforcing laws. So we didn't have an executive leader. What's an executive leader?
So the executive leader is like the president. The executive branch is responsible for enforcing laws. So that's one of the many roles that the president of the United States has today.
That seems pretty simple. Why didn't we have an executive leader to begin with?
If you remember, King George was the king over England during this time, and a lot of colonists did not like the way King George was ruling, and they were worried about giving one person too much power, kind of like the king.
Exactly, and that makes a lot of sense. But without an executive leader, there's no one person to go to in times of emergencies. So if something really bad happens, you have no one to turn to. Instead, it's a group of people who all have to work together to come to a decision, and it takes a long time. So we needed one person that we could count on to oversee the government the day to day, to make sure that things were getting done in a timely manner, as well as to ensure that we are enforcing our laws throughout the land so that everyone is following the rules and no one's causing chaos.
So how did the Constitution fix that?
We are going to have that executive branch. So now we have a new branch of government. The president's going to be the head of the executive branch. He's only going to be allowed to serve for 4 years. Why do you think that they would put that limit on him?
Well, I think it's to make sure that this person doesn't get too much power.
That makes sense. King George could rule his entire life. There was no sort of limit on how long he could be king for. Once he was born and his predecessor died, he became king, ruled for the rest of his life. It seems a little crazy to give someone that much power. So the people are going to get to choose who they want, elect them into office, and then that person will serve for 4 years. At the end of that term, they're going to have to step down and either be reelected, or the people will get to choose someone new. It's up to the people.
Wait, can the president be reelected over and over and over again?
That's a great question. So at the very beginning of our nation, the answer would be yes, they could. But George Washington, our first president, is going to set an example by stepping down after 2 terms. Everyone's going to follow that example for a while. Later on, our Congress is going to create a law that solidifies the fact that a president can only serve for 2 terms. So the maximum amount of time someone can serve for, if they're elected in a regular way, would be 8 years.
Sounds like a great compromise.
It does, and it sounds like a great plan to make sure no one gets too much power.
Yeah, I'm sure that made the colonists feel a lot better.
So our next issue is tariffs. And Ms. McKellar reminded us last time that a tariff is a tax on an imported good. States could impose their own tariffs, which means that they would have all sorts of different trade agreements and tariffs with different countries, which got really confusing when you have 13 different states, all of which have different trade agreements with France and with England. That gets super confusing. So what's going to be the fix to this?
Yes, so states can no longer impose their own tariffs, and the federal government makes laws about trade.
That sounds pretty smart. But states are still going to be able to regulate trade that happens within their own state. So they keep that power. But then what happens if you have a business that operates within multiple states?
Oh, what do you mean between different states?
Oh, so I mean, like if I had a business and that business operated kind of like a Chick-fil-A. If I had a Chick-fil-A, y'all know how I love Chick-fil-A. And I had a Chick-fil-A in Georgia and in South Carolina and in North Carolina. So I'm operating a business throughout multiple different states. Well, do I follow Georgia's laws? Do I follow South Carolina's laws?
That's tricky. So what's the solution?
So the solution was that the federal government will be over all interstate trade. So if you have a business that's only operating within South Carolina, you would follow South Carolina's trade laws. But once your business goes outside of South Carolina and into multiple states, now it's under the federal government. We're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get into some Supreme Court cases later on down the line.
Sounds good. Let's move on to the next one.
Sounds great. So the next one was what kind of stalled our government. It kept us from being able to do anything. If you remember, 9 out of 13 states had to agree on a law for it to pass. That's a lot of states to agree.
Yes, it's already so hard to get a lot of people to agree on something in general.
I agree. It's a bloodbath in our household when we're trying to decide between Chick-fil-A and Zaxby's.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. So what in the world are we going to do about this?
So rather than 9 out of the 13 states having to approve a law for it to pass, now you just need majority rule.
Oh, so like what would that percentage look like?
Only 51% of states need to vote on something or agree on something for it to pass.
That sounds a lot more efficient. I think we can get that done.
Yes, things were able to actually get done.
Perfect. Which kind of goes into our next issue, which was each state only had 1 vote. And we talked about the fact that we had larger states and smaller states. Larger states were angry about this because they felt like their people weren't being evenly represented within Congress, but smaller states loved it because it kind of gave them more of a say. So what are we going to do about this?
So in the legislative branch, or the branch that creates laws, it's a bicameral legislation, which means 2 houses. There's a House of Representatives and there's a Senate. The House of Representatives is based off of population per state. So each state gets different representatives based on their population.
That makes sense.
Yeah, if you have a larger percentage of people that live in your state, you get more representatives.
How long did the House of Representatives serve for?
2 years, and there's no term limits, which means they can keep running for office over and over and over again.
So unlike the president, who only gets 2 terms, they could just keep running until they don't get elected anymore.
Correct. But if people don't think they're doing a good job, they can fire them by simply not reelecting them.
Sounds good. Now, what's this other house?
Yes. So this is the Senate. The Senate, no matter what your state's population is, each state gets 2 representatives.
So that's going to make the smaller states happy.
Correct. So it's a compromise. It helps the larger states and the smaller states.
That's awesome. How long are the senators going to serve for?
6 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and there's no terms, so they can keep running for office over and over and over again.
Wow, that seems a little crazy.
Yeah, but again, if you don't think your senator is doing a good job, you can fire them by simply not reelecting them.
That makes sense. So before we get into our last issue, let's pause and rewind just a little bit because we've already talked about 2 of the 3 branches of government. We've already talked about the executive branch, which has the president at the head of it. And we've already talked about the legislative branch who creates our laws. That would be Congress. And we just talked about the fact that they're made up of 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senator. The only branch we haven't talked about yet is going to be the judicial branch. The judicial branch's job is to interpret the laws. So they look at the Constitution, they look at a situation and they say, does this match the Constitution? And then they make a ruling. We'll talk a little bit more about the judicial branch in our next episode when we give our constitutional rundown and we talk about all the principles of the Constitution and any key vocabulary that you need to know.
Sounds good. So our last problem we're going to talk about is that under the Articles, states did not have to actually follow the laws passed by the federal government.
That seems insane. I can't imagine teaching in a classroom and the principal saying, none of your students have to follow your rules. You can set them, but it doesn't really matter.
No, that would be chaos.
Absolute chaos. The amount of 6-7 that would happen.
So how did the Constitution fix this?
So it's a pretty basic fix. Basically, the federal government is going to be the supreme law of the land. So when you hear supreme, you should just think highest law of the land. So the federal government has final say. They have specific powers granted to them by the Constitution. Anything that the Constitution says that they can do, they can absolutely do it and make those decisions. And they have final say. Whatever power is not given to the federal government trickles down to the state governments. Whatever power is not given to the state governments trickles down into our local governments.
Well, it sounds like the Constitution fixed a lot of problems.
It really did. The one main thing to take away from this, though, is how the Constitution strengthened the federal government. Our federal government is a lot stronger after the Constitution than before the Constitution. So we know it strengthened the federal government, but is this going to work out?
Well, today we actually follow the Constitution of the United States. So I think it's safe to say that it worked out. However, it wasn't perfect. We've actually made a lot of changes to the Constitution. It's really hard to make changes. We'll talk about it later, but we've made it work for us today.
It's really awesome because the Constitution is known as a living document, which means it's living and breathing. And like she said, we continue to make changes to it every single year, really.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing because even though it's hundreds of years later, we still have an impact on this major document that really outlines all of our rights and freedoms.
That's all we have for today.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We can't wait to see you next week as we talk about some of the principles of the Constitution and some key vocabulary that you need to know.
Make sure you like, subscribe, and smash that notification bell.
Exactly.
So you know whenever we post.
If you're not a big YouTube person, go ahead and go check us out on Spotify, as well as you can find us in your social studies teacher's Schoology page. That is hard to say.
You did great.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. Bye. That was my stomach.
We should add that.
At the end, I'm going to have some like B-roll. I'm going to do like B-roll at the end of all of this. Okay.
Is that like bloopers?
Bloopers,
Okay.
yeah. B-roll would be what didn't make the A-roll.
Why was that so funny?
I don't know. That was funny though.